Hello, Professor. This is Simon Gagnon. I am in your virtualization course at Mohawk College. The course code is Comp 10110-05, and this video will act as my submission for assignment 2. In this video, I'm going to be running through Hyper-V, and I'm going to explain why I'm choosing the configuration settings that I need to choose for a brand new scenario. If you recall in the very first video, I came up with the scenario of working at Pizza Pizza as a home agent. I created a virtual machine that required very little in terms of resources, and there was going to be very little interaction between the host OS and the guest OS. So I wanted to come up with a new scenario for this new assignment, something a little bit more exciting, and I came up with a scenario that required a heavy amount of resources and was going to have a lot of interaction between the host OS and the guest OS. So I apologize in advance, it's going to be a little bit long-winded. It's about an 8-minute explanation for the scenario, but if you'd like to skip all of that, you can go to the 9-minute and 15-second mark where I actually get into Hyper-V. So feel free to do that. The scenario is not hugely important, but I figured just for the sake of it, I will explain that. I'll try to be as clear and concise, and I'm going to do that right now. So what is the scenario? Well, the scenario is that I've decided to quit Pizza Pizza, so no, I'm unemployed, I'm strapped for cash, and I'm looking for a sturdy job. But while I do that, I've decided to make a little bit of income by working with my fellow local musicians. Well, what can I do with them? I did go to McMaster University several years ago, and I enrolled in the multimedia program. So it gave me a lot of experience using multimedia programs such as Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Audition, Adobe After Effects, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, and a lot of other different programs. I also acquired a lot of those programs, so they're a bit older, but I still have them. So what I can do for these musicians are posters, poster designs, logo designs, web designs. I can do some audio engineering. I can create demo tracks so they can submit it to label companies and venues so they can get gigs. I can do some video editing for them. I can do a lot for them. So that's great. One of the other cool aspects is that I actually used to be in the music industry. I was in a band that was lucky enough to attract this big-time producer by the name of Dave Rave, and he had worked with a lot of artists that you and I are definitely going to know, like David Bowie, Marilyn Manson, Coal Chamber, a bunch of other different bands. And he was pivotal in our success in getting us out there, getting us to tour all around the world, like the UK, Europe, Canada, US, Japan. He was very instrumental in allowing us to meet very influential figures in the music industry. So not only can I help these musicians become successful with multimedia, but I can also kind of guide them in terms of what they need to be successful and what they need to avoid and all that fun stuff. So in my opinion, this is like a recipe for success, right? So why would I need a virtual machine for this? Well, let me explain. When I got my laptop for the first time in August, I had Windows 10, I had a 4K screen, and I had a lot of old hardware or software. The problem with the software was that for whatever reason, Adobe Photoshop and several third-party plugins did not adapt well to the resolution. Even if I switched from 4K to 1080p, the programs looked really, really tiny. And I'm going to show you an example of what I'm talking about, but really quickly, the first thing I did was let's find a solution to this. And the only solution at the time was either wait for them to fix it, wait for Adobe and these third-party plugins to fix their problems, or change the registry. Well, that doesn't make any sense to change the registry if you're not very comfortable doing it, and waiting for Adobe to fix their products can take a long time. So let me show you what I mean when it comes down to what the actual programs kind of look like. I'll give you an example by going to this photo of what Photoshop should look like. So you can see right here, the tool tab looks good, pretty easy to select. Same thing with the menu bar. You can select all this stuff and you understand what to do with it. But what did it look like? It looked like this. Really stretched, really tiny, and if you're not very familiar with this program, this is going to be useless to you. Not only is it going to be useless to you if you don't know the program, but even if you do know the program, it's kind of hard to click on these icons. So it wasn't the greatest experience using this program, and it's going to definitely take time away from you completing the task you need to do. But Photoshop isn't that bad. Photoshop is actually a bad example because I'm very familiar with Photoshop, so I probably could use this even though it looks kind of bad looking. I'm going to go into Adobe Audition. With an audio engineering program, a lot of the programs that you're going to use are third-party plugins because they're going to be responsible for coming up with cool effects, some mixing effects, compression, stuff that the main program does not have access to. So I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to go into a track and I'm going to load up what's called the CLA vocal plugin. And this is a plugin for your vocals, and you're going to see it looks normal. But this was actually one of the plugins that had the same issue where everything was really small. So just imagine if you look up, I'm going to show you right here. This is where you can see something that says Rock Man Dry. Imagine that being really tiny where you could barely even read that. Well, it's not a big deal if you know what that is, but a lot of these third-party plugins were not very reliable. So when you look here, it doesn't have a lot of reverb or delay, and you can tell that because the yellow buttons with the arrows mean on, and the reverb, delay, and pitch have white arrows, which basically mean it's off. And there's a plugin that I really like that's just left to Rock Man Dry, and it's called Rockman. If I just click left on here, I'll see that. So I'm just going to click left, and I'm going to see Rockman, right? And wait, that says ABV Woolly Bully. Okay, so what just happened? Because I know when I've used this, all I have to do is hit the left arrow, and it should go to Rockman if I'm on Rockman Dry. I'm just going to go through this because okay, we're back to a Rockman Dry. Let's click it again. Look, a Rockman. As you can see, it's not very reliable. For whatever reason, sometimes it decides it's just going to put me back into the front of the queue or back to the, I don't know, in the middle. You never know. So if you don't have the ability to see what you're looking at, it can be very time consuming. And when you have a band here that is looking to record music and they only have an hour, you don't want to be spending 5 minutes trying to come up with a preset that you know works really well for the guy's voice or the girl's voice. So this is one of the scenarios that show you can't have this. But instead of coming up with a dual boot for Windows 8.1 just for the programs that don't have a good resolution adaptation for Windows 10, I might as well just come up with a virtual machine. Why? Well, with these plugins, even though there's not a lot of support, we know that eventually they're going to fix this. They're not going to allow this to be the case for their entire run of the programs, right? They're going to say, hey, we are going to fix this, just give us a couple months. So I don't want to come up with a dual boot. That's just a pain. I can come up with a virtual machine for Windows 8.1. It's an operating system that I know does work with these programs. It doesn't have that issue of squishing it the way that Windows 10 does. And I know that I'm only going to need to use it for probably a couple months until they fix this program resolution adaptation problem that they have. So this is the best scenario, is coming up with a virtual machine. Again, I like Windows 10 more than I like Windows 8.1, so if I can avoid using Windows 8.1 for everything, I'm going to try to do that. So let's go into my system, and I'm going to show you what I have to work with, and then we'll get into Hyper-V. So really quickly, I have an Intel i7 quad-core processor, 32 gigs of RAM. I have a 64-bit operating system. I'm going to show you I have a Windows 10 Pro version so I can use Hyper-V, but it's not actually activated for this video. I'm just going to pretend it's activated. And then really quickly, I'll go also into my hard drives, and I'll show you I have a C drive that has 677 gigs. I have a secondary drive that has over 200 gigs, and I have an external drive that has 2 terabytes free. And once I show you those, we'll get right into Hyper-V. Now, let's get into actually working with Hyper-V. So I'm just going to scroll down and find Windows Administration Tools, Hyper-V Manager. We're going to load this up, and you're going to see, like a good student, I did my blended learning with Windows 7. So I'm going to click on Simon's laptop, make sure that's clicked on. I hit Action, New, and Virtual Machine. So the before you begin screen is explaining everything you need to know, but essentially in this particular scenario, more so than the first scenario I used in the first video, I really cannot accept just default configurations. I really have to have full control over this, and that's why I'm going to be choosing next and not finish. Also, this whole little do not show this page again, this is another reason why you don't want to just click on this. You want to have this so you have the option to kind of see whether finish or next is good for you, right? So I'm just going to move next. I'm going to create a name for the virtual machine. I'm just going to say Windows 8 Pro. It could be anything as long as I know what it is, but Windows 8 Pro, I'm not going to use Windows 8 for anything else, so that's sufficient for me. And then when it comes to this, the location, I'm going to keep it on the C drive. In the previous example, I used the D drive, but again, I didn't need a lot of resources. With this, when you're doing any kind of graphic design or video editing, especially video editing, but even graphic design when you're doing 3D rendering, it can use a lot of hard drive space when you save your files. So I need something that's going to be big. I'm going to use the C drive, and I'm going to actually end up using 500 gigs down. Now you're going to say, well, that's only leaving you 177 gigs free. But keep in mind, I have like video games and stuff like that that wouldn't be on here if this was actually a work machine. But that is essentially why I'm going to be using the C drive. C drive is going to give me a lot more space to use, so I'm happy with that. So I'm going to leave it on C, change the name to Windows 8 Pro so I know that this is my work operating system for the guest operating system, and we're going to hit next. Choosing between Generation 1 and 2, very similar to the workstation in VMware. Generation 1 is going to have a lot more support for it. It's not going to have all the new special features, but when it comes down to this work scenario that I have, I want something that's going to be reliable. I want to know that if I do come across any issues, that there's going to be a higher chance that these issues that I have are going to have some kind of support, some kind of fix to it. If I use Generation 2, as much as it's got newer virtualization features and UEFI based firmware, to be honest with you, that just means that there's a chance that you're going to run into something that hasn't been as supported. I'm going to stick with Generation 1. I'm confident with that, and I'm very comfortable with Generation 1 as opposed to Generation 2. So we're going to hit next. Now when it comes to memory, this is my favorite feature on Hyper-V, the fact that we can have dynamic memory for a virtual machine, because especially with this example, like I said, if we're rendering video, rendering requires a lot of RAM, and I'm going to use 24 gigs out of the 32 gigs. The reason why I'm going to be using 24 is when it comes to Windows 10, which is running in the background, we only need 1 gig of RAM. In terms of processor, 1 gig, so we don't need a lot. So giving it 24 gigs is probably going to be enough for audio engineering and simple graphic design and web design. But I like the dynamic memory because if I do any kind of 3D rendering or video editing and there's rendering of frames and all that fun stuff, I like that this will push that RAM from 24 gigs up to maybe, let's say, 28 or something, whatever it's comfortable pushing it up to. And that's really important to me, especially with this scenario. So I'm just going to basically go in here, change this to 24 gigs, and I'm going to keep this checked as use dynamic memory for the virtual machine. So we're going to go next. This, in your tutorial, you suggested just having it not connected. I actually did go into the virtual switch manager, and I created an external virtual switch, and I would actually use the external virtual switch even though it's teenage local bands that I would probably be working with at most. You never know if someone's going to have a private server that they want us to upload a lot of their information to on a VPN, so I'd probably use external virtual switch just to make sure that there's never an issue. Now I have to warn you, I'm using Camtasia to record this video, and it's a trial version, and the only way for me to save the video without having a huge watermark in the middle of the screen is by not connecting to the internet. So even though I'm using external virtual switch and I'm explaining why I would use that, when I load this virtual machine and I install all of the software and install the OS, I'm not going to be able to connect to the internet, but I'm just letting you know in advance why that's the case. But I would typically use my external virtual switch that I created using the virtual switch manager. So I'm going to hit next, and this is where I'm going to be able to create the actual VHDX or the virtual hard disk, sorry. Again, I'm going to keep it in C. I'm happy with this. I'm going to change the file size to 500. I was a little bummed that they didn't have the dynamic option for the virtual hard disk, but I thought it was kind of cool that if you go to edit disk, you can actually expand this, and I do believe that it would make for a better performance for this machine where you're expanding it and it's not a dynamic expansion. It's something that you have to go into, and at least I can expand it. That's the most important thing, but still 500 gigs is probably going to be sufficient. And like I mentioned, and I was going to mention this really quickly, a lot of the files I'm going to save onto my external disk because it's got 2 terabytes. A lot of times I'm going to be carrying this stuff around with me. I won't have my laptop. I'm going to be going to clients' homes and saying, hey, look what I have. So 500 is going to be very sufficient for me, at least until things pick up for me. But in the beginning, I think this is more than enough. I don't have an existing virtual hard disk, so I'm not going to choose that, and I'm not going to attach a virtual hard disk later. So we're going to choose next. Now here, we obviously need to install an operating system, so we're going to click on this, and we're going to use an image file. I already have it here, but I'm just going to show. Basically, if I went to desktop, here it is, Windows 8.1 with the update 64-bit. We're choosing that, and we're going to hit next. So we can review this, make sure everything is going as planned, but it looks like everything's pretty good to go, so I'm just going to hit finish, and it's going to configure. And it's probably going to take several seconds to do. Hopefully everything goes well. There we go. So it seems good. Now, I'm not going to start this right away. In the tutorial, I believe we just started it right away, but the one thing that I was concerned about is when I click on this guy and I go to settings, we didn't really configure how much CPU or processor speed or processors I could use. Right now it's just set to 1. That's only 12% of my total system resources. Remember, I'm using a lot of resources. So I have a quad core, which will give me up to 8 virtual processors that I can use. And what's good is as I go up, you can see what the percent of the total system resources are being used. I don't want to do 75. I was thinking about it, and I thought, even though most likely if I'm using the guest OS, I'm going to be focused on the guest OS, I do have to go back and forth between host OS and the guest OS. So having just a quarter of my resources available for the host OS, I don't feel as confident with that. So I'm actually going to bring it down to 5 virtual processors, 62. I think that's sufficient. Again, I can always change this later, but I'm going to start off with that, and hopefully that will work for me. And everything else seems good to me. I'm going to apply, we'll hit OK, and then we are going to connect. So I'm going to hit start, and it's going to start this whole installation process. So right now in the video, I'm just going to speed this up until the installation process is done, and then I will finish up the video from there. Okay? I will talk to you as soon as I am done. Okay, so we're back and everything's loaded. Took a little while, but it's all loaded and everything seems to be in working order, except for the fact, like I said, that I don't have the internet loaded, or active, so it's not going to be active as well on here, even though we have the external virtual switch. But again, that's just because of the Camtasia video. I just, again, if you need me to do this and do a separate video where I can get it working,
by all means let me know and I can show you that it will work. But I think the last thing that we need to do for this assignment is just go into command and make sure that I have a unique ID. Oop. And I typed that in wrong. So let's go right here. Oh, that's it. There we go. Okay, so that's everything, and I hope that this explains everything that you need me to explain for the assignment. Again, if you do have any questions or if you did want me to explain anything further, please let me know. I'd be happy to explain my thought process and how I did anything. But I think that this should cover everything. So thanks for watching the video. I hope it wasn't too long, and I will see you in class. Have a great day. Bye.